Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
Today, we're taking a close look at the first 100 days of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as Secretary of Health and Human Services.
Yeah, we're drawing from that town hall he did on the Dr. Phil podcast. It gives a pretty good window into his initial thinking.
Right. We want to unpack his priorities, how he's seeing the nation's health issues right at the start.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The goal is really to pull out the key insights for you, give you a clear picture of his early vision.
Okay, so let's dive in. His background is, well, it's not typical for an HHS secretary. 40 years, mostly in environmental law.
That's right. The Waterkeeper Alliance, which he founded, is huge global reach, 46 countries, hundreds of local groups focused on clean water.
But his move into health advocacy wasn't, planned.
No, not according to him. He traces it back to an article he wrote in 2005 about thimerosal.
A mercury preservative in some vaccines.
And he says that shift came at a pretty steep price, personally and professionally.
Yeah, he mentioned losing friends, allies, even family pushback.
Which he uses to frame it as, a long-term commitment, not just politics. He feels he was kind of pulled into it.
Right, to help average Americans, as he puts it.
So now he's heading HHS.
Yeah.
And the scale of this agency is just massive.
Yeah. $1.7 trillion budget. That's hard to even wrap your head around.
It really is. Nearly a third of the whole federal budget, 7% of GDP.
And twice the Pentagon's budget. You mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, which leads to this. Well, this paradox he highlights.
All that spending, but the U.S. doesn't stack up well on health outcomes.
Not compared to other developed nations, no. We spend 2, maybe 3 times more than the average of, 37 other developed countries.
But our health is worse.
Significantly worse outcomes. He calls the U.S. literally the sickest people in the world, highest rates of chronic disease.
Wow. And
Yeah.
COVID really threw that into sharp relief, didn't it?
Absolutely. The U.S. has about 4.2% of the world's population.
But accounted for 16% of the COVID deaths. That's a huge disparity.
It is. And Kennedy finds that deeply concerning, especially given some of the, let's say, positive spin on the U.S. response.
He also mentioned the CDC's own explanation for those poor COVID outcomes.
Right, that Americans were already sick, averaging almost 4 chronic conditions when they died from COVID.
Which Kennedy seems to imply points back to failures in the system itself.
Exactly. And it's not just COVID mortality. He listed other worrying trends.
Yeah, declining fertility, lower testosterone, and sperm counts in young men.
Girls hitting puberty much earlier, 6 years earlier than historically.
Rising infertility, and that shocking statistic about military readiness, 74% of young people not qualifying.
It paints a pretty bleak picture, moving beyond just healthcare costs to, national well-being.
He used that comparison with Indonesia, didn't he?
Yeah, stark contrast. They spend about $3,300 per person on healthcare, lifespan of 84.
In the U.S., $12,000 per person, lifespan stuck at 79.
And while Europe's lifespan increased by 6 years, ours has basically flatlined.
It's incredible, and the shift in what we're spending on.
That's key. Back in his uncle's time, chronic disease was maybe 3% of health issues.
Now
Now it's 60%. And 95% of our current healthcare spending is just managing chronic diseases.
which has huge economic ripple effects, too. Costs growing faster than the economy.
Right, 2% faster.
Mm.
He gave that example of the furniture maker in Wisconsin.
Finding it cheaper to hire someone overseas than pay U.S. healthcare costs.
Yeah. It suggests the system isn't just failing on health, it's potentially hurting economic competitiveness, maybe even national security.
So faced with all this, his first major move was setting up a commission.
The MAHA Commission, Make America Healthy Again, established by executive order.
And its job is to dig into the root causes of this chronic disease epidemic, especially in kids.
And the scope is incredibly wide. Diet, toxins, medical treatments, lifestyle.
Environment, government policies, food production, even electromagnetic radiation and corporate influence. It's a lot.
It really covers the gamut. But diet seems to be a really central early focus for him.
He talked about the number of ingredients allowed in U.S. food versus Europe.
Yeah, around 10,000 here compared to just 400 in Europe. And many ingredients common here are banned there.
Like food dyes. He made a specific commitment on those.
To eliminate petroleum-based synthetic dyes within 2 years.
And he used Fruit Loops as an example.
Right, American Fruit Loops full of chemical dyes. But the Canadian version, same company, uses vegetable dyes.
Why the difference?
He says it's cheaper and makes colors brighter, more appealing to kids. Driven by profit, basically.
That contrast, chemical versus vegetable dyes, it really highlights how regulations differ, doesn't it? Prioritizing cost over health, perhaps.
which connects to the influence of big industries. He brought up the tobacco industry's history.
How they diversified into food in the 90s when tobacco faced more pressure.
Exactly. And, crucially, they moved their scientists, experts in addiction over to the food divisions.
Leading to these hyper-palatable, low-nutrient, maybe addictive foods. High sugar, salt, artificial flavors.
Precisely. And it goes beyond ingredients. He talked about food processing itself.
Adding softeners so you chew less.
Yeah. And since chewing signals fullness to the brain, less chewing can mean overeating before you feel satisfied.
Plus pesticides, other residues, things designed to kill organisms, which can't be good for our gut microbiome.
No. And then there's this idea of response cost foods.
Meaning how much effort it takes to eat something.
Kind of like an apple takes more effort than, say, a soda or a highly processed snack.
Low effort means your brain might not register fullness as quickly.
That's the idea. He used a bean and cheese burrito or refined sugar as examples of low response cost leading to overconsumption.
And link this to the huge jump in sugar intake, 18 pounds a year in 1800 to 180 pounds in 2009.
A tenfold increase.
Huh?
And a pretty clear correlation he draws with rising diabetes, now hitting almost 40% of teens as pre-diabetic or diabetic.
So, okay, he's identified problems, set up the MAHA commission. What obstacles does he see?
Well, no surprise here. Powerful industries, specifically pharmaceuticals and processed food.
With huge lobbying power and massive ad budgets.
Definitely. He told that story about Roger Ailes at Fox News.
Saying pharma ads made up 75% of their evening revenue.
Yeah, and how that inevitably shapes what gets discussed or not discussed on air.
And this influence ties into censorship and misinformation labels, too, which he's experienced directly.
Right. Getting kicked off Instagram, he said, even when citing sources. And then the revelations about White House pressure to censor him.
Which Elon Musk helped bring to light on X, formerly Twitter.
So the pushback he's getting now isn't new to him. It sounds consistent with what he faced for 20 years before this role.
Let's shift gears a bit. Vaccine safety and the measles outbreak, another major area for him.
Yes. We've seen the second largest U.S. outbreak since 2000, he noted. 847 recent cases.
And sadly, 3 deaths reported, though he put that in context.
He did. Comparing it to Canada, similar numbers with a much smaller population, and Europe with far more cases.
He acknowledges the MMR vaccine is generally effective,
but points to waning efficacy, maybe 4% a year. And while outbreaks are mostly in unvaccinated groups, some vaccinated people are getting sick too.
And he raised specific questions about the combined MMR shot.
Yeah, that it wasn't safety tested as a combination in the same way single vaccines might be. He suggested potential links to more adverse events compared to separate shots.
There was a whistleblower case he alluded to, questioning the combined safety aspect.
Right. Concerns about whether combining them might lead to unforeseen synergistic effects that weren't fully studied.
But his current recommendation is still to take the MMR while more studies happen.
That's what was stated, alongside a push to reform VA-EARS, the Adverse Event Reporting System.
Because it underreports issues.
Massively. According to the Lazarus study, he cited capturing less than 1% of actual vaccine injuries.
Which ties into his point about most vaccines, historically not having the same kind of placebo-controlled trials as, say, the COVID vaccine did.
Correct. Exempt from that level of pre-licensing testing. He argues this lack of data hinders truly informed consent.
So better tracking, more transparency, better information for doctors and patients, that seems to be the goal.
Exactly. Which leads into another major initiative, autism research.
A $50 million commitment to figure out causes and treatments.
He calls autism an epidemic, pointing to the huge rise, 1 in 10,000, back in the 70s to 1 in 31 recently.
Even higher in some places, like 1 in 20 in California. The economic cost projection is staggering, too, over $1 trillion a year by 2035.
It is. He also took time to clarify comments he'd made about profound autism.
Right, the non-verbal, non-toilet-trained group.
He stressed his remarks about limited potential were only about that specific group, roughly 26% of cases, and said he got support from parents in that community for acknowledging their reality.
His main argument on autism seems to be about environmental causes.
Strongly. He argues genetics alone can't explain such a rapid increase. He uses the analogy of smoking and lung cancer, an environment trigger acting on susceptible individuals.
And he points to EPA data suggesting the epidemic started around 1989.
Yes, implying some kind of widespread toxic exposure around that time.
Plus the 4-to-1 boy-to-girl ratio suggesting something sex-specific in the response.
Right. potentially interacting with genetic predispositions, like issues with detoxification pathways or mitochondrial function.
Okay, moving to other specific environmental worries. Microplastics.
He acknowledged the concern, mentioned studies finding them even in brain tissue, said intensive research is ongoing.
And PFAS, the forever chemicals.
He's very focused on those, mentioned his own legal background fighting PFAS cases. They're everywhere: water, food, cookware.
And hard to regulate because companies just tweak the formula.
That's a major challenge. He said he's working closely with the EPA on it.
What about stratospheric aerosol injections or chemtrails?
He was clear, not happening within his agency, HHS. He speculated it might involve DARPA or jet fuel additives and pledged to investigate.
Okay, let's talk about Big Pharma. He seems laser-focused on reining them in.
Very much so.
Yeah.
We talked a lot about regulatory capture.
The idea that agencies get too close to the industries they're supposed to regulate.
Exactly. He used the term revolving door, people moving between FDA CDC jobs and high-paying pharma positions.
Citing former FDA Commissioner CDC Director Julie Gerberding moving to Merck.
Right. He vowed to end that revolving door practice within HHS.
He also opposes direct-to-consumer drug ads.
Strongly. Exploring ways to end it, acknowledging free speech rulings, but arguing pharma ads are different because taxpayers often subsidize them via tax write-offs.
And conflicts of interest on drug approval panel.
Another big target. He claims most independent experts have ties to drug companies. He wants truly independent scientists and rigorous placebo-controlled trials for all new products.
Shifting to infectious disease treatment, like measles again.
He noted a sort of lack of current knowledge on treating measles, even though it used to be common.
Before, widespread vaccination and poverty programs reduced severe outcomes, right? Millions of cases, but relatively few deaths, mostly in malnourished kids.
Right. So while vaccination is the focus now, he stressed meeting better treatment protocols, maybe mentioning vitamin A, especially for communities who might refuse vaccines but still need care if they get sick.
He was also critical of COVID treatment protocols.
Felt there was a lack of early treatment guidance, too much reliance on ventilators and remdesivir later on.
And he raised concerns about the lockdowns and school shutdowns.
Big concerns, citing that Brown University study on IQ loss in toddlers, teacher reports of learning deficits, arguing the response might have harmed kids significantly.
So for new parents facing vaccine decisions, what was his advice?
Pretty straightforward. Do your own research. Just like you'd research a car seat or baby food, research vaccines.
Okay, so looking ahead, even with limited staff confirmed, what are his top priorities now?
He listed three main ones: getting harmful ingredients out of food,
Okay.
ensuring vaccine safety through better testing and transparency,
Right.
and ensuring baby formula is safe and reliably available.
So wrapping up this deep dive on his first 100 days, it's a real picture of a critical stance on U.S. health, a focus on root causes like diet and environment.
Yeah, major concerns about vaccine safety processes, regulatory capture, and a clear intent to shake things up, even anticipating strong opposition.
Which leaves us with a thought for you, the listener. Considering everything we've discussed, the food system issues, environmental health, corporate influence, regulatory challenges, what single change do you think would be the most impactful for improving America's health trajectory?
It's a complex question. We definitely encourage you to dig deeper into the data on chronic diseases, look into the vaccine safety studies, or the lack thereof, as Kennedy argues, and explore that influence of corporate money in healthcare.
Understanding these connections is really crucial. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.